Hello and welcome to High Tech in the Heartland. I'm Bob Goff and I'm with Scott Richardson, who is our expert on all things tech, but just because he's an expert, you know, we all just want to talk about his history and background and things like that, like the disclaimer, of course.
Okay, first of all, the disclaimer, and a disclaimer upon the disclaimers. I'm not an expert in very many things. In my career, I've had a couple of different jobs where I was able to become within striking distance of being an expert on a number of things.
Sure.
But about the only thing I'm an expert on, say, is patent prosecution. I'm a patent attorney.
Okay.
And the disclaimer I have as an attorney is that anybody that happens to be watching this, this doesn't create an attorney-client relationship. Just because I'm talking here doesn't mean that you're my client. And also, I'm not, even though I am a patent attorney, I'm not giving legal advice here. You would have to be my client, and I would have to know your specific situation for me to give legal advice. And then finally, I work for an East Coast law firm, Robinson Cole, and I'm not representing Robinson Cole's position on anything I say. I'm just speaking as a private citizen and a former electrical engineer who knows a little bit about a few things.
So one of my business partner, Jim Rapp, of course, a prominent attorney, local attorney here in town, and yes, you guys want to cover all your bases, dot your T's, cross your I's, all that good stuff. So,
hopefully.
All right, what kind of tech stuff are we talking about today?
Well, Bob, we're going to be talking about GPS today, which is one of my favorite technologies.
And it is something that, one thing that GPS has done, it has made maps obsolete, correct?
Pretty much. It's killed a number of things, maps being one of them, the main one. I mean, they don't even give out maps on the freeways anymore. You pull over to the rest areas, they don't have maps anymore for the most part. I kind of miss that. I kind of miss the maps.
Maps and phone books, two things that have really gone the way of the dinosaur or the dodo.
Oh, you could make a long laundry list of the things cell phones have killed off. You know,
Yes.
Cell phones are one of the main sources of GPS.
Yes. And I remember, okay, so talking about GPS, before they became so prevalent in our phones, you know, I never had one, but many of my friends had the Garmin and things like that.
Oh, yeah, those were the early ones, Garmin.
So how does that work?
Well, it's a fairly complicated system. It's what's called a global navigation satellite system is the generic term. And I thought GPS was a generic term. And in doing a little research for this particular episode, I learned that GPS isn't the only global navigation satellite system. There are, four others. GLONASS, the Russian system. Galileo, the EU system. NAV-IC, a system that India has up in the air. And Biden, a Chinese system.
So GPS is basically the American version of that?
GPS is the original and the American version.
Okay.
And I think the thing is that there are just a huge number of military ramifications and uses for this.
Yeah.
And other countries felt like they needed it too for their own,
Sure.
defense, their own security. So we have well over 100 well over 100 navigation satellites, like GPS satellites, up in the air right now. 31 of them, or maybe even more than 31, are GPS. There are 31 operational satellites. And when I say operational, they're actually transmitting signals. You need the way it works is you need a minimum of 24 satellites to get coverage over the whole Earth. And they launched the first satellite in 1978. They thought of the invention. It was conceived. Okay, and here's the tie into the Heartland. The invention was conceived in 1973 in the Pentagon. It was reputed to be received over a Memorial Day weekend in the Pentagon by three men are credited with the co-inventors. And that's the way it is with a lot of complex inventions. Is there's not necessarily one mad scientist working in his lab till late in the morning, and he does everything. A lot of times it's a collaboration of a couple or three or even more inventors. I filed patent applications with more than half a dozen people named as an inventor on the patent application. But anyway, one of the inventors was named Bradford Parkinson, and he is a man from the Heartland. He was born in Madison, Wisconsin, and grew up in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and he was the military fellow that was one of the inventors, and he's probably the reason they were in the Pentagon doing this. So that's the tie into the Heartland.
And what year approximately was this again?
1973 was when it was first conceived, and they had a lot of technical problems to overcome. I mean, they conceived the basic idea of how it works, which isn't terribly complex how it operates, but it was almost an insurmountable number of sources of air to overcome in order to make it operational. And like I said, right now there are 31 satellites that are operational that broadcast signal to us. And in order for our little GPS receiver, and we all got the instructions when we received it, it has to be able to see at least 4 satellites to get signals from 4 satellites to work. It could, in theory, work with less accuracy with 3, because you're actually doing trilateration navigation. You're getting these 3 signals, and if you get 1 signal, you're narrowed down to a sphere of where you are. Mm-hmm. And if you get 2 signals, you're narrowed down to that sphere where another sphere cuts into it, so a circle of where you are. And if you get 3 signals, then it takes it to a point. But the problem is there's a lot of air in the system, and so they have to overcome these airs. I did a little research on it, and the 3 main types of air. Well, let me back up. Let me talk a little bit about the history of it.
Okay.
And actually, I have a little bit of history of it too. When I first moved from Los Angeles, I was an aerospace engineer, and my wife and I decided we wanted to live in Washington, D.C. It just seemed like a cool city to live in. Mm-hmm. Lots of vibrant, lots of history, lots of vibrant stuff going on there. And so neither of us had jobs, so we just decided, okay, we're going to move on this date. And we ended up giving our 2 weeks notice, and my wife, we gave ourselves several weeks to find jobs, and I hadn't found a job. It came down to I gave my notice and I didn't have a job yet. And so finally I scrambled around, and the week before we moved, I landed a job as a defense consultant. And so I worked for a little consulting firm based in Santa Barbara, and they needed a guy in Washington, D.C., and I was their guy in Washington, D.C. Okay. But anyway, I did a whole bunch of different projects for them, different tasks. And one of the tasks I did was, GPS was still pretty early. This was 1992 when I went there. And GPS had been operational for a few years, but still a lot of people didn't know about it, and there weren't too many. I mean, they knew of it, but not, they didn't have.
They knew of it because they probably watched some movie back then that had somebody bomb targeting of something, and which is what you see today. I mean, with Mission Impossible or one of the Marvel movies where they're all over the globe and things like that. So, but again, back then that was probably people's first exposure. I would think would be in the movies.
Yeah, and one reason a lot of people didn't know about it was because the military was pretty tight-lipped about it. They pretty much kept it for themselves for as long as they possibly could. And one of the tasks I had working for this little consulting company is we worked for a naval group, and they wanted a report on how GPS works, just from a top level perspective, and then how it's going to be implemented into their weapon systems, what it would be good for. And so I was tasked with drafting that report, and so I drafted that. It was a white paper that was, I don't know, maybe 30 pages long or something, that talked about those things. And back then, they sent out two signals. They sent out the P code signal, which was the accurate one, and that's roughly maybe slightly less accurate than the ones today, about the same accuracy. But then they sent out a CA signal, course acquisition signal, which was off by, they said about 100 meters, but it was roughly within 50 meters. And that was the one that the public could use, the CA, the course acquisition signal. Now that's gone away. And the reason that went away was because of some kind of government infighting between agencies.
Because say it.
Imagine that. Not everybody in the U.S. government is marching to the same beat.
This just in, the CIA and the FBI don't like each other. How's that?
Well, back then, the FAA and the Coast Guard had a bone to pick with the Department of Defense, because both of those agencies just desperately wanted GPS for their mission that would help them out in what they did.
Yeah.
And the military is kind of no, that's not going to happen. And so what they did is they came up with a workaround, and it really benefited the civilian users too, is they created a ground source GPS transmitter, and they would transmit, they would have what's a fake satellite on the ground transmitting signals from a known area, and they would use that to correct the errors that were introduced in this course acquisition code. And they actually had they created, and the military was very stubborn about this, they created a whole network of these fake satellites on the ground, these transmitters. Mm-hmm. I looked at a map of it, and there must have been, I don't know, it must have been 40 or 50 of them or more.
But I mean, that's
around the United States.
That's kind of what the military does. I mean, they get all this technology, and they kind of do the first initial research or initial push on it and test on it and run it, and then it becomes to the public. The internet, a big one there too.
Exactly. Case in point. That's exactly the same situation too, Bob. But because of because of these agencies came up with a workaround to the court's acquisition code, and then also because of international pressure from other countries wanted accuracy to the good signal, not just the crappy CA signal.
Sure.
Eventually, in the year 2000, I can't remember. I think Bill Clinton might have initiated it, but they decided to just drop the whole CA thing and just send the one signal and let everybody have it. Now, for years, I kind of had this conspiracy theory myself that they didn't relinquish control over the P code, the accurate code, until they came up with a way to prevent other countries from using our own system to launch missiles against us. And I figured they could probably steer it from the ground or something. Like if they detected a missile, they could steer it off course by changing the GPS codes. I'm not so sure about that now because all these other countries have their own, nav systems in addition to GPS. There are 5 of them up there. So what I think is we probably track all those satellites very carefully. And the first time a war happens, like a big ass World War III, all those satellites are going into the ocean. They're all going down.
Yeah,
that's the first thing that's going to go.
Take them out.
Take them all out. That's what's going to happen.
And I mean, like you said, the practical use today is, as we discussed earlier, with not having to use maps. So if you're going on a road trip, you got your phone whether it's in your car or on your phone or whatever, then it's telling you where to go. And then of course, one of the most popular uses of it would be to find your phone, because of all the times we lose our phone and we're wandering around the house wondering where our phone is.
That's one of the most pragmatic uses.
It is.
Okay, how many uses can you think of?
Well, those are the
I
big
sat
ones.
down and I made a laundry list of things I could think of that use it. Let's see how many you can off the top of your head.
Okay, maps.
Yeah.
Finding your cell phones, period. Probably, I'm sure there's some sort of GPS tie-in with a GIS system in terms of mapping and trying to determine property lines and things like that. I'm sure it's also involved in the Google Earth process. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, those are perfectly fine uses that we all are aware of. And there's civil engineering that when they build big buildings, a lot of times they use that to measure, the measurement, and they'll actually have a ground transmitter right there on site. And then also aircraft, FAA, the original one that they, and they have a ground transmitter right at the airport because it's extremely important that they know exactly the altitude.
Oh yeah.
I mean, because they're landing planes, relying on GPS.
I've had friends who have been air traffic controllers, and I just don't see how they could do it, because I would look at that screen and see all those planes and be like, how are they not hitting each other? And I know it's a big country and it's a big sky up there, but still, that would freak me out. Yeah.
In addition to navigation in cars and mapping, is theft recovery.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then also farming, the latest planters and a lot of the implements have GPS. Those tractors are just a work of just amazing technological wonders.
Back when I was growing up and worked for my dad and my uncle and my grandpa in the fertilizer and chemical business, and we'd spray the fields, and you would just load up everything and spray it. They were just starting to get the technology that would mark and map and how much you had and calibrate your. Now it's all laid out there. The terrain. Everything. To the ounce how much chemical you need to put on 40 acres or whatever. Yeah. It's incredible. Yeah. I should have known that one. I feel I just betrayed my my heritage and upbringing.
Off the top of your head, though, Bob, that's pretty impressive. You got most of the ones I had here, but a couple others I thought of were prisoner ankle bracelets.
Yeah, yeah.
And golf course tracking. I mean, anybody that's a golfer, they use GPS to.
Can we start making it standard so that there's a tracker in the ball? Because I don't hit the fairway. So if we could just put the tracker in the ball where my phone would go, your ball is 30 yards that way. That'd be fantastic.
It just so happens I know the guy who invented that technology and got the patent on it. He's a patent lawyer. He works for Oblon Speedback. His name's Eckhard. And he's just a German patent attorney. And he thought of the idea and he filed a patent application. He got the patent on it.
How expensive would that make golf balls to put a tracker in the ball?
the thing is, when he invented it, it kind of wasn't feasible because the receivers were still pretty big, but now receivers are so tiny, and also
and then plus when you hit the golf ball, isn't that going to damage the receiver?
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But they've come up with new clock technology. There's a company called SciTime out on the West Coast, and they don't use a quartz crystal oscillator anymore. They use a MEMS clocking device, which is a microelectronic machine. And little tiny robot parts.
I just thought of something though, because when you watch golf on TV or you go out to the KC range and you hit balls, you see them get tracked. Mm-hmm. So you shouldn't need to put something in the ball. If you can just look at it this way, the way they do it, you should just be able to see it go. And that's what I need. I need that screen in my golf cart that says your ball went there. Scott, there you go. Let's get to work on that.
Well, also, the worse you are as a golfer, the more you need this technology.
And I'm bad. So, yes.
Right?
No, that's great. Now, that is all just, again, when we talk about doing this subject, again, I think that, this kind of technology, and I think for, when we talked about cell phones and cars and things like that, this is the technology for parents. Just so parents have that peace of mind. Okay, that's got to be one of the best reasons to get a kid. I think kids, parents, me, everybody spends way too much time on their phones. But for the kids to have a phone or a watch so their parents know where they are, I think that's one of the best uses.
Yeah. The last use I could come up with off the top of my head was wild animal tracking. You always see the the shows where they're tracking bears or whatever to see. So, and I'm sure if we sat down and thought about it, we could probably come up with another dozen uses.
And again, you talk wild animals. I'm sure it's also done for livestock.
It probably is. Yeah,
I'm sure it is. So,
absolutely.
See there, I made up some ground there for my rural upbringing. There you go. So, well, I'll tell you what, Scott. Again, this is just now it's like we talk about this, and then I'm sitting here with ideas in my head for future shows. And again, we want to get to we also want to do some local historical stuff as well to talk about all the great technology that's been developed here in Quincy, which we talked about and touched on a little bit in our first episode. But again, I think that looking at this kind of stuff, it's just really fascinating to get a look on this and how to get those patents. If you have an idea, you never know if your next idea is going to be the next GPS. So get that thing patented. Talk to Scott and say, hey, I got an idea. And he can say, I think that's a great idea, let's pursue it. Or he can go, never mind.
I used to, if somebody pitched an idea to me and I thought, well, I don't know if that's something we could even get patented or whatever. And I'm more reluctant to do that now than I used to be. Because usually the people that are doing that and especially if they're in that industry, they know more about it than I do.
Right.
And there have been people that I tried to talk out of filing and they went ahead and filed and I got them a patent or two. And it turned out to be just an awesome idea that just really was, and I think, wow, what if I would have talked this guy out of it?
So what you do is they bring you the idea and you say, okay, great, and move on.
I'll tell them, if I think it's going to be hard to get a patent on it, I'll tell them that.
Yeah.
And also I tell them that, this is my own opinion, but a lot of whether you get a patent or not depends on the patent examiner you happen to draw.
Yes, that's what you said. So. And you
I
can't pick your own patent examiner, unfortunately.
No, you can't, and you can't get rid of them either. You can't change patent examiners. Once you get the guy, you're kind of...
So you're stuck with the guy just for that particular patent, though.
Well,
if you come up with another patent application, you could get it. Again, it's total chance who you get.
Well, the patent office is divided into art units, and each art unit, all the examiners, and an art unit might have 10 patent examiners in it, and they all examine the same technology. Like my own I examined cellular telephony patents, cellular telephone stuff. I did stuff from Motorola and Ericsson and all the big makers, but I didn't examine anything in the TV arts, say,
right.
Even though it's an electronic art.
Right.
And also I examined a split docket because I changed art units during the 2.5 years I was there, and I had a split docket of cellular telephony and speech signal processing. So.
Well, like you said, so you hook somebody up with a patent attorney, which is you, but then you get to the examiner and you get Fred the examiner, and Fred's great, and you're like, hey, I can work with Fred. But then you get Jane the examiner, and Jane's tough. So But again, it's all you can't talk to Jane. Can I have Fred, please? It doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't work that way. You can't change horses midstream at the patent office, unfortunately. But most patent examiners are fairly reasonable, and I always make it a point. I call them up and talk to them because you can get a lot done.
You used to be one, right?
Yeah, I used to be a patent examiner.
Yeah.
I spent 2.5 years. It was kind of important to me to do that. I took a 50% cut in pay to go to the office, which was
you learned more. And
Yeah.
that experience was probably almost worth that pay cut. Almost.
Probably, I don't know. It was kind of an enjoyable job. As far as government jobs, and it's not an easy government job. They're on production. Those patent examiners, they have to turn out a certain number of office
quotas.
actions and their quotas, and they actually get fired if they don't meet their numbers.
Wow.
Which is just almost unheard of in the U.S. government to get fired for
no
not
kidding,
working.
right? No, absolutely. So,
Yeah,
anything else before we close episode 2 out?
Oh, I think that's about enough.
Great.
I think we've covered that topic.
Well,
at a high level anyway.
You know what? Again, and it's great. Again, I want to thank Scott for coming forward and wanting to do this because I like learning this kind of stuff. I'm kind of a nerd and a geek sometimes too when it comes to this, and I just think it's just fascinating, and I can't wait to hear what our next topic's going to be.
Yep.
So,
Thank you, Bob. It's been fun.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for watching High Tech in the Heartland.